Alright, so I recently played through Splosion Man and Splosion Man, only about 15 years late. Honestly, I was never really into the Xbox Live arcade thing when that was new. For some reason, this was one of the games that I was aware of on it. I also remember Castle Crashers, and I think there was also like a South Park game on there too. I think it had something to do with Scott Tenderman. And I don't know, maybe there was some like mobile games, and I'm sure there was other licensed smaller titles for known series, but off the top of my head, those are the only things that really come to mind. And like I said, I don't know why Splosion Man was one of them, but it was, and I finally got around to playing it. It was alright, nothing too crazy. I do like some of the concepts they had, like the concept of almost what I would make the comparison to is maybe like Sonic, when you just got a big stream of momentum going and you get into a rhythm. It just feels really good to play. Except in this game, you want to try to build that same momentum by chaining together explosions. And hell, it's almost a little like the ring mechanic with the explosions, which are also your health, which leads you to have to be careful. I think you can triple jump as far as you'll go, but then you'll be weak and one-shot KO'd. And overall, throughout most of the games, I feel like they did a great job of really exploring the possibilities of this sort of unique mechanic. Actually, something that's kind of funny is I can't really think of any platformers I own that sort of have stuff with the background and the foreground. I think Kirby Return to Dreamland and the Donkey Kong Country Returns both did stuff with that. I didn't realize how much earlier before Splosion Man did stuff with that too, so it was kind of fun to finally see that a bit and realize that that's been around a bit longer than I thought. Splosion Man, I think, was the better of the two games. I don't think it comes down to more than just it being bigger because it's the sequel. The levels were a bit longer. It had an overworld, new abilities and enemies and that sort of thing. There was some general frustrations I had with the first game that were solved in the second game, which I think sort of helps the sequel stand out that much more. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong when I say this, but I felt like the first Splosion Man, the challenge came more from forcing you to speedrun, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like throughout a lot of the game, you had, lava rising from the bottom or a spike wall coming at you from the left or right or both, which gave you limited time to, see what's ahead and do what you have to do. And definitely challenging, especially on your first go when you're not familiar with the levels. And there's some of that in Splosion Man 2, but I feel like that it was a bit more fair, and I feel like Splosion Man had a lot more just general fun puzzles with the different mechanics and items that the game has. Another thing I liked better too is, yes, I did cheat on the game. Essentially, if you die so many times, the game gives you the option to cheat. In Splosion Man, it clears the whole level, which is kind of disappointing because Splosion Man does it right, because it just brings you to the next checkpoint so you can still experience the rest of the level. So for me, that was big too. I tried not to use it as much as I can. Like, if I felt like I was really close, even if I had the option to skip the part or the level, I would keep going. But there are definitely some levels where I used it. More so in the first game than the second game, I think, too. The second game, I may have only used like 2 to 3 max per world out of 15 to 17 levels, I think it was. I still think in the first game I cleared decently over half or maybe even 2/3 of the levels without cheating. I don't know, I guess some of my complaints with the first game, something I really didn't like is it really ended on a downer. Like the last few levels, and maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like they were recycling sections from other difficult levels, except they were, adding some little twist to make them a little more challenging, and I just don't like that. To me, it almost kind of comes off as kind of lazy. Like, I would rather the game be a couple levels shorter with unique levels, or for them to have this kind of content. Kind of like the game that comes to mind is the Super Mario 3D Land and World, where they had something similar, but it was post the main game. You didn't have to do it to see that last boss and the ending and all of that. That is definitely a moment where cheat came in handy, because I just didn't want to redo some of the stuff, especially some of it just was more frustrating than fun to begin with. I guess another thing is sometimes I feel like the checkpoints were a little... Once again, I think it was more so in the first game, but it's frustrating when, you're on a difficult part and then you finally clear it, but then you fuck up the next part, and then you have to redo that difficult part 10 more times to get past it again, because you're just not that good, I guess. But you kind of don't want to cheat, because you can clear that part and you want to give that other one a go. I remember one level in particular, too. It was like you had to walk a bunch to the part I was stuck on, and then it was like specifically designed to where if you just missed the jump, a missile would hit you and you'd die. And it's kind of like, what's the point of that? Because it's not even like there was a challenge before. It just felt like a waste of time of, the 20 or 30 seconds it took to, jump across a couple walls and make it back to the point I was dying at. Once again, this wasn't necessarily a huge issue, but it was noticeable when it had occurred a few times. I don't know, I'd rather more checkpoints, or for the sections after the checkpoints, not before, but after, to be easy, just wall jumps or whatever. I know this is probably not a common complaint. Some people like that challenge, but I don't know, when that sort of stuff happens with me, it's more frustrating than fun. It's definitely not the first time I've experienced that. But even then, I mean, once again, cheat existed, but some of the other instances I can think of that was more going for 100% as opposed to going to just clear a level without cheating. In general, the games tend to have a kind of humorous tone. Wasn't really, hilarious or anything, but I can at least appreciate some of the jokes in that, I suppose. I guess the endings are kind of stand out too. I guess this is kind of mild spoiler, but, or actually a major spoiler, I guess, since it's talking about the ending, but they're just kind of, like, I'm just going to be vague with it. It just sort of reminds me of, like, just, and I don't know how, culture was at Twisted, whatever the company was, Poxel or something. But it just sort of reminded me of just, fucking around with friends and that, doing goofy, stupid stuff, and I can appreciate it, at least from what they showed. Looks like they had fun, so that's cool and good for them. Kind of crazy. I'm not saying I necessarily am pushing for a sequel or anything. Like I said, these games for me were just kind of fine for what they were. Nothing too crazy or special for me, but when you re-release it a few times, it's kind of just surprising that they never revisited and did like a third one. But I guess sometimes, it's just one of those things where you feel like you really nailed it and you don't want to fuck with that, I guess.